Mr. Usman, could you tell us about the history of the city of Jerusalem, please?
All right, but before that, I would like to, talk about something else to get ready to answer this question. The thing is, some people confuse about Jews and the Israelites and Hebrews and so on. So, originally, around the 15th century BC, there were a group of semi-Bedouin tribes that immigrated from the south in Arabia to the north in Canaan, and they lost their land there because no rain, no water, so they migrated to the north, and they attacked the cities of Canaan, which became Palestine after that. And the different tribes spread all over the place, and they were threatening the place during the 15th century BC. And these became known as the Hebrews. However, one tribe of these Hebrew tribes migrated to Egypt, went to Egypt. The tribe with Joseph and the patriarch and Jacob and so on. It is because of the connection of this tribe, of the Jacob tribe, with the royal palace of Egypt, pharaonic palace of Egypt, that this one tribe became especially important because of the connection with Joseph being a minister of Pharaoh, and then again, the birth of Moses and so on. So they became known as the children of Israel. The Israelites are only a tribe, children of Israel. They had a father, Jacob, who became known as Israel. So the children of Israel represent only one tribe of the Hebrews. During the Israelites living in Egypt, in fact, we know about Hebrew tribes still attacking lands in Canaan. So not all the Hebrews were Israelites. The Israelites were only one tribe of the Hebrews, which, because of the connection with the royal family of Egypt, became important in history. Then again, when after the Exodus and Moses and so on, when the Israelites left Egypt, there is a chance, there is a possibility, the indication that, in fact, rather than 500,000 or so going out, there were only a few hundreds, the tribe of Israel, but when they re-entered the land of the promised land in Canaan, they rejoined the Hebrew tribes that were there. That's why we see them worshipping different local Canaanite deities rather than the God of Moses, Yahweh, or Elohim, or whatever. After their return, they worshipped other gods, and the Bible keeps saying that different prophets came to advise the Israelites to go back to the worship, the Mosaic law and so on. Later on, after Nebuchadnezzar of Babylonia, during the 6th century BC, attacked Judea, attacked Canaan, he took prisoners the upper class of the Judaic. Judea is what you say the West Bank of Palestine. Jerusalem and the West Bank were called Judea because, later on, when in Babylon, the upper class and the scribes of the Bible started to, regret that they have abandoned the Mosaic teaching and the law of Moses, and they felt that it is because of the abandoning of this religion of Moses that the trouble they came in due to that. and they started for the first time to put down the Bible or the Torah, the 5 first books of the Old Testament, put them down in writing in Babylon. So the Bible was written in Babylon. In the Bible itself, in the Old Testament, the word Jew is not used. But people outside the Greek word and the Roman word call these people Jews because of their religion. And they did not became identified really as Jews before the writing of the Torah. I mean, only because the Torah introduced the real Jewish religion. So this is the situation. We have 3 different things. The Hebrews were different tribes. One tribe became the Israelites. Then the population of Western Canaan, of Eastern Canaan, of the West Bank, became of Judea. It's called Judea. Became known as Jews by other people because of their belief. Some Jews are not descendant of the Israelites, either because they were Hebrews connected to the tribes of Israel, or because they adopted Judaism later on, like these people in Ethiopia or Yemen or Caucasus or so on, Khazar and so on. So not all the Jews are a descendant of Israel, not Israelites, but the Israelites were children of Israel in the book, the special family. Now, if we come to the city of Jerusalem itself, originally it was not called Jerusalem. If you go to the Bible, we know that Jerusalem is on a top hill, in a hill higher than the valleys around it, and there is a kind of a rock coming, a natural rock coming out on one part, and the tribes and the people of Canaan at the time did not have temples to worship, or they usually go to a higher mountain and make some stones, higher stones, and worship near the stones. They worship near this is always the case for the Israelites when in Canaan, and also for the ordinary people who are not Israelites in Canaan. In general, not like Mesopotamia or Phoenicia or Egypt, who had temples and gods worshipped in temples. They used to worship on high mountains. So we know from the Bible, for instance, that Abraham, when he wanted to sacrifice his son Isaac, he went to the temple, to the high place of Jerusalem, and to the rock, holy rock. It was regarded as a holy rock for the local people, which the Bible called Jebusites, and he wanted to sacrifice, because this was regarded by the local people and by the inhabitants of Canaan as a whole as a holy place. There's no temple, it's only a rock, but it was regarded as a holy place. You see. If we go to historical evidence, we know that Thutmose III, the king of the 18th dynasty Egypt, who made the empire, first empire between Egypt and northern Syria, Thutmose III, on his first travel campaign in Canaan, he went to just the north of Canaan, south of Lebanon, in a city called Magadan, and he there met in a battle in front of a fortified city, met 300 different cities. I mean, at that time, every city became a state, a kingdom, or whatever it is. 300 from Syria and from Canaan, all gathered in around this fortified city to fight Thutmose of Egypt. And he defeated them. He surprised them coming from the mountain rather from the main road. So he defeated them by surprise. And they entered the city and closed the doors. And there was, so he surrounded the city, and he himself, his army remained there, and he himself went east and stayed for 7 months in a city in the east, which its name at that time is not mentioned. Thutmose said when he went out at the head of his army, he had with him a kind of an ark, including the image of the god Amun, the Egyptian god Amun, whom they believed that make the army victorious. So he took the ark and he went to wait until the cities, surround the city, falls into his army, and stayed for 7 months in the city, which we knew from other sources was known at the time as Kadesh. We have 2 cities of Kadesh in the text, one of them in northern Syria and the other one is Canaan. And it seems that this Kadesh did not become part of the collision against Thutmose. It was friendly to him, so he went and he stayed in Kadesh. And obviously the obvious place he would leave the image of Amun in the ark would be in the local holy place around near the rock, the natural rock. So it at the time it was known as Kadesh. There's no building, no temple, and there's no surrounding buildings. Buildings were a little bit further on a different on the south area. So later on, about less than 100 years after Thutmose III, about 70 years or so, when his son, our great-grandson Amenhotep III, ruled Egypt, he put an Egyptian army unit in Jerusalem and in different cities that belonged to Egypt in the area, in Syria and in Canaan. So there was an Egyptian army living there, chariots and so on. I think they were located in the area, behind the now Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount, which is known as Solomon's Stable. It was known as Solomon's Stable. I believe this, and for every city where an Egyptian army unit was stationed, in fact, there was a kind of a worship temple to follow, but it was not. So I think Amenhotep III, during Amenhotep III, around this rock, natural holy rock, they had some kind of a chapel or something like that. It was not a big kind of temple as such. So it's a small kind of a holy kind of for the Egyptian local army to worship. So it was known, although it was known at Kadesh as during the time of Thutmose III, suddenly with the Amenhotep III, we find the name of the city has changed to Urushalayim. Uru is a city, Shalayim is peace, the city of peace, Urushalayim. Urushalayim or Urushalayim. It took its name during the time, we have it in the text, the letters sent from the Abdu Khiba, or Abdu, the ruler of Jerusalem to Egypt, indicate, give the name of Urushalayim at that time. So we have no indication after that Obviously, the Egyptian rule ended about in Canaan, as in general, ended around the 11th century BC, when the Philistines, there were some kind of volcanic eruptions in the islands, Greek islands, which made mass immigration from these islands into the shore of the Eastern Mediterranean shore. They went to Asia Minor, they went to Syria. They didn't go to Lebanon, but they went to Canaan, and they went to Egypt. The reason they didn't go to Lebanon, according to recent theories, is that they, in fact, were cooperating with the Phoenicians to use their boats in their movement. But we know for sure that they came to Egypt, the Philistines, and they were settled in the Gaza kind of area. And then eventually they kind of intermarried with the Canaanites, so the land became known as Philistine because of that. Anyhow, the Philistines, the arrival of Philistines to Canaan ended the Egyptian control of this city, of this area. We have no more news about Jerusalem for this period until Nebuchadnezzar, since 6th century BC, came and conquered this area and took the Israelite remnants as prisoners in Babylon. And then again, Cyrus of Persia united what is known as Persia or Iran under Persian control in the 5th century. And he defeated the Babylonians and conquered the whole area. Here, we don't have too much information from history, but we know from the Old Testament book of the Old Testament, that it was this Cyrus of Persia that allowed the Jews to build a temple in Jerusalem. Again, obviously, the rock is the center holy.
First temple, you mean?
The first. This is the first Jewish temple to be built. Again, we have no certain information, but it must have been a small temple at the time. However, during the second half of the 1st century BC, we know that a new temple was the temple was rebuilt.
What about the wall today in Jerusalem?
And the wall, yes, and the wall was established in the 2nd century BC. The wall of the whole wall not of the temple, but of the whole ground, the Temple Mount. So it's the second half and we know again that this temple and its walls, except one part of the wall which is known as the Western Wall or the Weeping Wall, was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70 AD. We know that a Jewish temple existed from history sources because, for instance, in Egypt during the 3rd century BC, the king Philadelphus, the king of Egypt in Alexandria, sent a message to the high priest of the temple in Jerusalem, asking for some scholars, scribes, to come, so he can in Alexandria to translate the Bible, the 6 books of the Torah, into Greek in Alexandria. So there was a temple. There was a reference that there was a temple in Jerusalem, and scholars came from the temple of Jerusalem to Alexandria during the 3rd century BC. And also a contemporary writer, Josephus, who was a Jew from the priestly family who became a Roman citizen, wrote at the time that in 70 AD, the Romans, Vespasian and the Roman emperor, destroyed completely the Temple of Jerusalem and the city of Jerusalem, except this western wall. So there was a temple between, say, the 5th century BC and 70 AD.
But do you mean
A Jewish temple.
Osman, the temple was at the same time of King Solomon, or this is different?
This is during King Solomon. There was, we don't know. I'm talking about history now,
Okay.
and history does not know King Solomon as such. Obviously, in my book, I will explain exactly who was King Solomon and
Real
where
King Solomon.
was the temple was established for King Solomon. But at the time of Amenhotep III, the great grandson of Thutmose III, there was an Egyptian kind of a small temple established there. This is the first temple ever.
Before this temple you talked about.
No, the Jewish temple is a bigger temple and more organized with priesthood and different things. It was more kind of a larger size of a temple. We have a priesthood of many people, which were all were massacred by the Romans. They were all killed. So the Jewish temple existed for about 4 centuries in this area. Now, after the destruction of the Jewish temple, the Romans, during the mid-2nd century AD, built another temple in the same area, in the same location, at the rock. But this time it was a Roman temple for Jupiter, the Roman god Jupiter. They built a temple for Jupiter during the 2nd century. Obviously, they built another temple for Minerva outside, which became the church after that. But on the Temple Mount, they built this temple of Jupiter. Later, when in 325, Constantine the Great became a Christian, adopted Christianity. His mother Helena became known as Saint Helen. She visited Jerusalem. Obviously, the Romans, when they became Christians, they dismantled the temple of Jupiter. They just took the rocks down. They destroyed it, the temple. And when Saint Helena went to, the emperor mother, she said under Minerva's, it's a different location for a temple, near the temple, in the location of the Christian church of today. She found wood blocks, and she thought this was part of the cross that Jesus was crucified on that cross. Anyhow, it was then dismantled. Later, during the 7th century AD, now the Roman called the new city they established with the new temple Aelia Capitolina. No longer Jerusalem or Urshalim or Kadesh or whatever it is. It became known as Aelia Capitolina. The early Arab conquerors, after Muhammad died in the 7th century, they went to Syria and Canaan and Palestine. It was not Palestine at the time. They called in the early text called the city Aelia. So it was not called Jerusalem or Shalim or Kadesh. It was called Aelia. And there is a story in Islamic tradition saying that Caliph Omar, the second caliph after the death of Muhammad, went to Jerusalem to take the key of, because it was surrounded by walls, and to take the key of the city. And he, at the time of prayer, came to the. Inquired about where is the David, the Jewish temple, and they they show him the rock and so on. And there was a Jew, a Yemeni Jew, who adopted Christianity. He became a Muslim. His name is Ka'b al-Ahbar. He came together with Omar, and when the time of prayer came, and Omar wanted to pray, Ka'b al-Ahbar told him, you can pray facing the rock, and Mecca will be behind. But Omar, according to this historical Islamic story, Omar said, but Ka'b, this is the rock is the holy temple of the Jews. And he gave his back to the rock, and he prayed facing Mecca. So there was in early Islamic traditions acceptance that the rock was representing the location of the Jewish temple. Now, in the Quran, during the life of Muhammad, Muhammad had some kind of a spiritual experience after the death of his wife, who was protecting him, and his uncle. They both were protecting him, and they both died at the same year. So he was with few followers and a lot of suppression. He had a kind of a spiritual experience. I mean, the Quran talks about that he traveled during the night to another. They call it the furthest mosque, Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, which is the mosque far away. And obviously, later on, and now, at this time, the Muslims take this to mean that this mosque mentioned in the Quran is mosque lies in Jerusalem. However, as we saw, in Jerusalem at the time, there was no mosque, temple of any kind. The Jewish temple has been destroyed. The Romans have dismantled their own temple. There were no temples at this time at all. In fact, recently, an Egyptian.
He traveled overnight.
It must have been a spiritual kind of experience that he traveled from Mecca to this further mosque, and then from the mosque he went.
How he can travel over a night?
It must be. It must have been a kind of a Sufi kind of spiritual experience, not a realistic historical experience. Because after that, they say that he traveled to heaven, to the throne of God, and so on. So it could not have been a physical kind of historical experience. It must have been a kind of a spiritual experience, but some people still take it as anyhow. The thing is, later on, the fifth caliph was after the first four caliphs who ruled from Arabia. The fifth caliph, Umayyah, Muawiyah ibn Umayyah, ruled from Damascus. He was ruler of Damascus, and he became the fifth caliph, you see. Now, before he died, he wanted to make sure that his son would follow him as a caliph. Usually, they used to, at the death of one caliph, the elders of Islam who knew, friends of Muhammad, used to gather and choose a new caliph. But he didn't want that. He wanted his own son to succeed him. So he wanted to take acceptance, to make these elders agree that his son Walid will follow him, succeed him on the caliph, you see. But those of Mecca and Medina refused to accept him. The friends of Muhammad refused to accept him. So eventually they sent an army to Mecca, and they destroyed the Kaaba, which is the holy shrine in Mecca. They destroyed it, you see. And when the Muslims in the Hajj, every year the pilgrimage, they go to Mecca, and Mecca was not there because it was destroyed. So instead, Al-Walid, who succeeded Muawiyah, who is successor of Muawiyah, started to build on top of the rock. He built a kind of this top of the rock, the dome of the rock, and he also built in the southern corner behind the Wailing Wall. He built a mosque. He called the mosque the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the further mosque. It is popularly believed that this mosque is the same mosque that the Quran spoke of. But at the time, as we know of the Quran, there was no mosque at all. This was built more than 100 years after the death of Muhammad, so nothing to do with it. It's a new mosque built in the 7th century, and the dome was also built. So around the dome area, instead of going around the shrine of Mecca, the Kaaba, the Muslims have to go to 7 times around the Kaaba as part of the rituals for the Hajj pilgrimage. And instead of that, they allowed them to go to Jerusalem and turn around the Dome of the Rock and until the day when they were able to rebuild the Mecca again, you see. So in reality, as you can see, nowadays there was a great disagreement on different things, but this is the history of Jerusalem. Yeah, I mean, the Romans, when they destroyed the temple, they forbade the Jews to live in the area, and they have to migrate. They went to north, and they went over North Africa, Egypt and Tunisia and Morocco, and then even to Spain, and they also went to Rome and Greece and South France and so on. So they were forbidden to live in the area, but this is Jerusalem. This is the whole city of Jerusalem. It's the history of Jerusalem.
The last question, Mr. Osman.
Yes.
Where was the real mosque was mentioned in the Quran? Where do you think was the mosque?
Because there was no real mosque there. An Egyptian Islamic scholar have recently find out evidence, written evidence, historical evidence, that in a city of Taif in southern south of Mecca, Muhammad, after the death of his wife and uncle, went to visit the city of Taif, hoping that he can find there some people who will follow him. And it is this surah, this text was delivered to Muhammad just at that time. So this scholar, Yusuf Zidan, his name is, suggested that in fact there was a temple, there was a mosque in Taif, and because the surah, the message came at that time after he visited Taif, that he visited the mosque in Taif rather than it makes more sense, because there was no mosque at all, there was no temple of any kind in Jerusalem at the time when the Quran mentioned that. It rather was in Taif, where Muhammad really is known to have visited it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Osman, for the very important information today. So we will carry on in the next part when you have time. But about your book, you have mentioned all
the book should be coming.
When the book will come out?
This book is called The Mystery of King David and the Temple of Solomon is coming out next August. But between now and then, can tell you in different parts the whole account, the story of who was King David in history,
Yes.
and who was Solomon, and where was the temple. I believe, to tell you the truth,
Yes.
that the whole biblical story of the whole Bible, Old Testament and maybe the New Testament, has its historical roots in the history of the 18th dynasty in Egypt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Osman.
Thank you.
And we will carry on when you have time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.